Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a look at That Used to Be Us by Thomas Friedman and Michael Mandelbaum.
Ah, a classic.
It is. You know that feeling when you think back and say, man, America, we really had it going on. What happened?
Yeah.
That's what this book is all about.
Yeah, it's a really interesting look at America's kind of fall from grace, I guess you could say, in the 21st century. And what's even more important than the diagnosis is the fact that they offer some ways forward, some solutions, potential solutions. So it's not all doom and gloom.
That's good, because I was starting to feel a little doom and gloom just thinking about it. We've got our notes and our highlights ready to go, so let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
The book opens with a story about Friedman attending a conference in Tianjin, China. And he's blown away by how efficient and modern their high-speed rail system is.
Mm-hmm.
And then he comes home and he's met with the just frustratingly slow pace of escalator repairs in Washington, D.C.
Right.
I mean, talk about a jarring comparison. What's the point they're trying to make with that?
Well, I think it really highlights their core argument. They're saying that America's underperforming, not because other countries are doing better than us, but because we have strayed from what made us great in the first place. They're really pointing to this sense of complacency as a major factor in our decline. We've gotten so used to being number one that we've kind of forgotten what it takes to stay there.
We've rested on our laurels for too long.
Exactly.
Yes, this has left us vulnerable to what they identify as four major challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Globalization, the IT revolution, our skyrocketing deficits and debt, and of course the whole energy and climate change crisis.
Yeah, they lay out these four challenges right up front. And I think what's really interesting is that they see these four challenges as being really intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
And they sort of have this compounding effect on America's ability to really thrive in the 21st century.
Yeah. It's like we're trying to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle. I mean, it's a lot.
That's a great analogy, yeah. It's a lot to handle. And what they're saying is it's not about trying to be like China. It's not about becoming China 2.0.
Right.
It's about figuring out what made America great in the first place and updating that formula for the 21st century.
Yeah. So be the best version of America.
Exactly.
But is that even possible in today's world? I mean, things are changing so fast, it's hard to keep up.
It is, and that's the million-dollar question. And they get right into that in Chapter 2. The world is still flat, only flatter.
Okay, I remember Friedman's earlier book, The World is Flat.
Yeah. Exactly.
So what are they saying is different now?
Well, they're saying that globalization and technology have accelerated dramatically since The World is Flat was published.
Mm-hmm.
They actually call it Flat World 2.0.
Okay, Flat World 2.0. What does that mean for regular people? Like, what does that mean for me?
Well, on the one hand, it means that the world is more interconnected than ever before. Individuals can connect and collaborate with each other across borders, sharing ideas, building businesses in ways that we couldn't have imagined even a few decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
They give the example of the Arab Spring. Remember the Arab Spring?
I do.
Social media played a huge role in those uprisings.
Right.
Allowed people to organize and challenge these authoritarian regimes.
That's true. I mean, social media can be such a powerful force for change, but it can also be a source of, misinformation, division. It's kind of a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes Flat World 2.0 so challenging. It's not just about connecting. It's about navigating this much more complex landscape. It's changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
And the rules are constantly being rewritten.
Right.
Think about cloud computing for a minute.
Okay.
Companies like Amazon Web Services, they give anyone with an internet connection access to this incredibly powerful computing resource. And then there's 3D printing. It's changing the way that we design and manufacture goods. It's really a revolution.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this ties together. Globalization, technology, the pace of change.
Yeah.
It's a lot. But what does it all mean for jobs? I mean, are all the jobs going overseas? Are we all going to be replaced by robots?
Yeah, that's the focus of Chapter 3, Average is Over. And you know what? They don't sugarcoat it. They say the job market's going through a radical transformation. And it's not just about jobs going overseas. Technology is changing the nature of work itself.
So even if we bring back all the manufacturing jobs from China, it's not going to solve the problem.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
The truth is, automation is replacing a lot of these routine tasks, even in manufacturing.
Right.
What they're saying is it's not enough to be average anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The job market is becoming polarized, with high-skill jobs requiring specialized knowledge, creativity, and then low-skill jobs that often involve tasks that are really hard to automate.
Okay, so what does that mean for people in the middle, like me? people with, average skills, or are we doomed?
Well, not necessarily, but we need to adapt.
Right.
We need to be lifelong learners. And they give a really striking example from the legal profession, actually. So you think about all those lawyers who used to spend hours poring over documents for these big trials. Well, there's this software now called e-discovery software,
Okay.
and it can analyze these documents much faster and more efficiently than humans can.
Wow.
So tasks that used to require armies of lawyers can now be done by algorithms.
Even white-collar jobs aren't safe. This is a little scary.
Yeah, it's definitely a wake-up call.
Hmm?
But it's not all doom and gloom, you know?
Okay, good.
What they emphasize is that this new landscape, it requires a different set of skills. So the key to thriving in what they call Flat World 2.0 is adaptability, it's critical thinking, problem solving, and the ability to collaborate effectively.
So it's not just about what you know, it's about how you learn
Exactly.
and how you apply that knowledge.
Yeah, and that's where education comes in, which is the focus of part 2 of the book.
Okay.
And they set the stage for that conversation in chapter 4, which is called Up in the Air.
Okay, now hold on a second. Up in the Air, isn't that the George Clooney movie about the guy who, fires people for a living?
That's the one.
What does that have to do with globalization and education?
It's actually a really clever way to illustrate how even these seemingly secure white-collar jobs aren't immune to the forces of globalization and technology. So the main character, Ryan Bingham, he travels the country firing people whose jobs have basically become obsolete.
Yeah.
It's this stark reminder that, none of us are really safe in this new economy and that our education system needs to adapt. We have to
Yeah.
prepare students for the jobs of the future, not the jobs of the past.
Okay, so it's a metaphor
Exactly.
for how our economy is changing and how education needs to change with it.
Exactly.
Okay, I get it. It's powerful. So in Chapter 5, Help Wanted, they actually set out to find out what employers want in today's workforce.
Right. That's right. And they talk to this really diverse range of employers. Everything from a call center in India to a high-powered law firm in D.C., U.S. Army, DuPont.
Wow, that's an eclectic mix.
It is.
But did those employers all have something in common? I mean, what were they looking for in their employees?
Absolutely. Despite all their differences, these employers stress the need for workers who can think critically, solve problems, and collaborate effectively. They were looking for people who can adapt to new situations, learn new skills, and contribute creatively.
So the same skills that are needed to thrive in this flat world 2.0.
Exactly, exactly. They call these folks, I love this, creative creators and creative servers, which I think really captures the essence of what you need in this new economy.
Yeah, I like that. So basically the message is we need to up our game when it comes to education. But what about those of us who are already out of school? Is it too late for us to learn these new skills?
That's a great question, and one that Friedman and Mandelbaum really emphasize throughout the book.
Okay.
They say that it's never too late to learn and adapt. In fact, they stress the importance of lifelong learning, which they talk about more in Chapter 8. Pass the books, hold the fries.
Hold on, wait a minute. Pass the books, hold the fries. What does that even mean?
Well, it's their catchy way of saying that education shouldn't stop when you graduate from high school or college.
Yeah.
We live in a world that's constantly changing. We need to be constantly learning. They actually use the example of South Korea, where parents are just incredibly invested in their kids' education.
Yeah.
And they emphasize that it's not just about the kids, it's about the parents, too. The parents are constantly learning and growing along with their kids.
So it's about creating a culture of lifelong learning, where education is valued and supported not just by schools, but by families and communities.
Exactly. And they say that this is essential for individuals and businesses and for the nation as a whole if we want to succeed in the 21st century. So it's not just about keeping up. It's about staying ahead of the curve.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But back to the classroom for a minute.
Yeah.
They talk about in Chapter 6, which way to the head of the class. They dig into why American students are falling behind.
Right.
So what's their diagnosis?
Well, they cite those international test scores like the PSL, which measures reading, math, and science skills. And we're not acing it. American students are actually declining in relative performance as they move through school.
So we're doing okay in elementary school, but then something happens. What's going on?
They argue that our education system is too focused on rote memorization and standardized tests, which doesn't prepare students for the complex challenges that they're going to face in the 21st century.
Yeah.
So they point to these successful education systems in other countries, places like Finland and Singapore, that prioritize critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity. They're really teaching kids how to think, not just what to think.
Right, so we need to revamp our education system.
Yeah.
But how do we do that? Is it just about throwing more money at the problem?
Well, it's more complex than that. In Chapter 7, A Race to the Top, But Who's Cheating, they look at what makes those successful systems in other countries tick. And a big part of it is the quality of the teachers. So, for example, Finland treats teaching as a highly respected profession.
Hmm.
They attract top talent, they give their teachers a lot of autonomy in the classroom.
Makes sense. Great teachers can make all the difference. They can inspire a lifelong love of learning and
Absolutely.
help kids develop those critical thinking skills that we're talking about.
Absolutely.
But attracting and retaining talented teachers is a challenge, here in the U.S. and in a lot of other countries too.
Right.
That we solve that problem.
Right. They suggest a multifaceted approach that involves, things like better pay, more professional development opportunities, and creating a culture that really values and supports educators.
So investing in our teachers is really investing in our future.
Absolutely.
But let's be honest, education's just one piece of the puzzle. What about the economy, technology, the environment? How do we tackle these big issues?
Yeah, so that's where the book takes this really interesting turn in Chapter 9. If you can't invent it here, you can't sell it here.
Okay.
They shift the focus to innovation and entrepreneurship.
Okay.
So they argue that America's ability to innovate is going to be key to our economic success in the 21st century.
Right. It's that classic American story. The
Yeah.
garage tinkerers who changed the world. Are they saying that that's fading?
They're concerned about it. They see this kind of decline in the entrepreneurial spirit in America, and they're worried that we're becoming too complacent, too risk averse. So they share some inspiring stories of young entrepreneurs, particularly those who are involved in programs like NFTE, the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I've heard of NFTE. It's all about empowering young people to become entrepreneurs, to take risks, and, to believe that they can change the world.
Exactly. And they're not saying that every kid needs to be the next Steve Jobs, but they are saying that we need to foster a culture that encourages creativity, risk-taking, and a willingness to experiment.
Okay, makes sense to me. But innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum, right?
Right.
I mean, what about the role of government? What about policies and regulations?
Yeah.
Don't they play a part in either fostering or hindering innovation?
Absolutely. That's a key point, and it leads us into part 3 of the book, The Political Challenge, where they start to really examine these political obstacles that are holding America back.
Yeah.
Buckle up, because this is where things get interesting.
Oh, here we go. Globalization, technology, education. Now we have to talk about politics. I'm already feeling stressed.
Yeah, but don't worry. Remember, they're frustrated optimists.
Okay, good.
They believe that we can overcome these challenges, but we have to confront them head on.
All right, I'm ready. Let's dive into the political arena. What's the first hurdle they identify?
So, Chapter 10, The Politics of Postponement, sets the stage.
Okay.
And it argues that America has developed a bad habit of postponing tough decisions. Kicking the can down the road.
It's so much easier to just ignore those problems.
Exactly. But they point to political polarization and the influence of special interest groups as these major factors that contribute to this inertia.
Yeah.
So it's like our political system is almost designed to prevent bold action. It's set up to prioritize short-term gains over these long-term solutions.
Yeah, so it's not just a lack of willpower. It's that our system is actually making it hard to make those choices.
Exactly.
And then they dig into the specifics of America's fiscal crisis in Chapter 11. The numbers don't lie.
Right, they don't.
Okay, let's talk numbers. What are the key takeaways from this chapter? How bad is it, really?
Well, they break down this ballooning national debt, which has reached these, just astronomical levels.
Yeah.
And they point to the ticking time bomb of all these baby boomer retirements. Social Security and Medicare are facing these massive unfunded liabilities.
Yeah, that's a little scary. It's like
Yeah.
we're making all these promises that we can't keep.
Right. And so they're saying, if we don't do something, we're headed for a fiscal disaster.
So what do they propose we do? Do they offer any hope?
They do. So they advocate for this balanced approach that includes both spending cuts and revenue increases. It's not about austerity
Right.
or just tax hikes.
Right.
It's about finding a sustainable path forward. And they also really stress the importance of reinvesting in areas that are going to be crucial for future growth, like education and infrastructure.
That makes sense. If we want a strong economy, we need an educated workforce and a modern infrastructure.
Excellent.
But those investments require funding. Right.
Right.
Which brings us right back to that need for responsible fiscal policy. It's a chicken and egg situation.
It is, and that's why they say we need this comprehensive approach. We need to address the short-term need for fiscal discipline, but we also need to keep our eyes on the long term and make these strategic investments.
Okay, I see the big picture, but let's zoom back in a little.
Sure.
In Chapter 12, The War on Math, they take on a very specific aspect of this: unfunded liabilities in state and local pensions.
Right. They use California as a prime example, actually.
Okay.
They point to the state's massive unfunded pension liabilities and this political gridlock that's prevented any meaningful reforms. It's really a cautionary tale of what happens when overspending and unrealistic promises collide with economic reality.
Yeah, California is often seen as a trendsetter for the rest of the country.
Right.
So are they suggesting we're all headed for a California-style fiscal meltdown?
They're certainly raising the alarm bells. They're basically saying that the same forces that led to California's problems are at play at the national level, and they're stressing the need for fiscal responsibility at all levels of government if we want to avoid a similar fate.
So it's not just a federal problem, it's happening at the state and local levels too.
Exactly. And it's not just pensions either. They dedicate a whole chapter, chapter 13, to healthcare costs, which they call the doctor will see you now, but for how long?
Healthcare. The elephant in the room.
Right. It's this huge, complex issue.
Yeah.
And it seems like everyone has a different opinion on how to fix it. What do they say about this?
Well, they take a really deep dive into the factors that are driving these healthcare costs up.
Okay.
Everything from the aging population to these advances in medical technology that are amazing but also very expensive, to these just administrative inefficiencies in our system. And they say that these rising costs are just unsustainable, for individuals.
Yeah.
For the country as a whole. So we can't keep throwing money at the problem.
Yeah.
What do we do? What are their solutions?
They advocate for a multi-pronged approach that includes cost control measures, things like negotiating lower drug prices,
Okay.
reducing administrative waste, and also promoting healthier lifestyles to prevent some of these chronic diseases that are so costly to treat. They argue that we need to shift from treatment to prevention.
Okay.
It's more effective and it's more cost efficient in the long run.
Makes sense. It's not just about treating illness, it's about preventing it in the first place.
Yeah.
I'm curious, though, what do they say about the energy and climate change challenge? That's another one of those huge issues that we're facing.
Absolutely. And that's the focus of Chapter 14, the war on physics and other good things. And they trace the origin of our energy predicament all the way back to 1979, which was a pivotal year for global energy policy.
Okay, 1979. I need some context. What happened back then that was so important?
Well, it was a perfect storm of events, really, that kind of set the stage for our current situation. So first you have the Iranian Revolution, which completely disrupted global oil markets.
Right.
It led to those price spikes and shortages.
Yeah.
And then second, you have the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident here in Pennsylvania,
Right.
which really created this widespread fear and opposition to nuclear power, which had been seen as this promising alternative to fossil fuels at the time.
Right.
And then third, you have Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms in China,
Okay.
which launched China on this path of rapid growth, and that just dramatically increased global demand for energy.
Okay.
So you have these 3 things happening all at once, and it really kind of set the stage for the challenges that we face today.
Wow. Okay, so those events set the stage. But what about America's response? Did we rise to the occasion?
That's where the frustrated part of their optimism comes in.
Uh-oh.
They argue that instead of addressing these challenges head on, we kind of got stuck in this cycle of denial and short-term fixes. We've continued to rely on fossil fuels, even though, the evidence for climate change is becoming more and more overwhelming.
Yeah. It's like, we know we need to change.
Yeah.
But we're addicted to the old ways of doing things.
Right. We're stuck in our comfort zone, even though it's becoming more and more uncomfortable.
Exactly.
They actually highlight the absurdity of climate change denial. They call it a war on physics.
A war on physics.
Like, we can ignore gravity.
Right.
You can pretend that it's not there, but it will catch up with you eventually.
Okay, so they're calling us out.
Yes,
But do they offer any solutions?
they do.
Okay, good.
In Chapter 15, If You Want My Vote, Show Me Your Plan, they lay out a path towards addressing America's energy and climate challenges, and they emphasize a multi-pronged approach that includes things like efficiency standards, carbon pricing, and investing in clean energy innovation.
Okay, so it's a comprehensive plan, not just a quick fix.
Right.
Give me the details. What do they propose?
Well, they argue for a combination of policies, including stricter fuel efficiency standards for vehicles, a cap and trade system to reduce carbon emissions, and increasing our investment in research and development for clean energy technologies. They use the example of the 1990 Clean Air Act, which, was this really successful piece of legislation.
Yeah, the one that helps solve the acid rain problem.
Exactly. They say that's a great example of how we can use policy to address these environmental challenges.
So if we could solve acid rain, which was a huge problem, then surely we can tackle climate change. It's just about, like, having the political will to make it happen.
That's their argument. They believe that we have the tools, we have the knowledge.
Right.
It's a matter of leadership and collective action.
Right.
But, and this is a big but,
Yeah.
they argue that our political system is making it increasingly difficult to actually implement these kind of bold, long-term solutions that we need.
Okay, so the political challenge is really front and center here. But haven't we always had political disagreements? Is it really worse now than it was in the past?
That's what they get into in Chapter 16, The Terrible Twos, which focuses on the decade from 2001 to 2010. They argue that this was this really, really challenging period for America, both domestically and internationally. We had 9/11, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the financial crisis of 2008, and just this, growing sense of partisan division.
Yeah, that was a really turbulent time. It felt like one crisis after another. But how did all of those events contribute to our current political dysfunction?
Well, they say that these events, while they were incredibly traumatic in their own right, they also distracted us from addressing these longer-term challenges that we were facing.
Okay.
So we became so focused on fighting terrorism and stabilizing the economy that we neglected some of these underlying issues that were eroding our national strength.
It's like we were so busy putting out fires that we forgot about fire prevention. We were constantly reacting instead of being proactive.
Exactly. And they say that this reactive approach has become really ingrained in our political culture. So we're constantly lurching from one crisis to the next without ever really stepping back and addressing those root causes. And this, they say, is a recipe for decline.
Okay, well, we've got a lot to think about here. Let's take a break and come back for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll explore the rest of That Used to Be Us and see what solutions they offer for getting America back on track.
Sounds good.
Thank you for listening to Rambling Dan Rowe's Deep Dive Book Reviews. Please help support our channel by clicking the like and subscribe button. Thank you.
Welcome back to our deep dive into That Used to Be Us. We left off talking about America's tendency to focus on short-term crises instead of those long-term solutions, right? Kind of a kick the can down the road mentality.
Right. And it was getting a little heavy there at the end. All those wars, the financial crisis, climate change. It feels like we're facing this never-ending series of challenges. But I'm holding on to the fact that Friedman and Mandelbaum call themselves frustrated optimists. So I'm hoping there's some light at the end of this tunnel. Where do we go from here? What do they propose we do about all of this?
Well, they argue that before we can even start to tackle these challenges, we need to address this deeper problem, the erosion of core values in American society. And that's really where Chapter 17, The Values Gap, comes in.
Okay, a values gap. That sounds pretty serious. What values are we talking about here? And how do we lose them?
Well, they describe a shift from long-term thinking to this kind of instant gratification. There's a decline in trust in our institutions and a rise in cynicism and a disregard for facts. Basically, they're saying that we've become more focused on me than we.
So it's like we've become a nation of individualists,
Mm.
each person just looking out for themselves. But, I mean, hasn't America always valued individualism? Isn't that part of, like, the American spirit?
It is, but they argue that there needs to be a balance, and they use this really interesting example, Goldman Sachs during the financial crisis. They use that to illustrate the dangers of what they call situational values.
Oh, yeah. Remind me about that whole Goldman Sachs thing. What happened there?
Right, so it involved these internal emails that became public where Goldman Sachs employees were basically boasting about selling these really complex financial products that they knew were very likely to fail.
Oh, wow.
Essentially, they were profiting from the misfortune of their clients.
So it's about ethics, doing what's right, not just what's profitable in the short term. Is that what they mean by situational values?
Exactly. So they contrast situational values, where you're just kind of doing whatever seems advantageous in the moment, with what they call sustainable values. And sustainable values are based on these, long-term principles, this sense of shared responsibility. And they argue that we need to rediscover those sustainable values if we want to build a really strong and lasting society.
That makes sense. If we want a healthy society, we need that foundation of shared values,
Mm.
a sense of community, a willingness to work together for the common good. But how do we get back to that? I mean, it seems like we've become so divided, so polarized.
Right. And that's the focus of Chapter 18, the trust deficit. They argue that this erosion of values has led to a decline in trust, not just in businesses like Goldman Sachs, but in all of our institutions like, government, the media, even science.
Okay, so we don't trust our institutions. But why is that a problem? I mean, shouldn't we be a little skeptical of authority? Isn't that healthy?
To a certain extent, yeah, absolutely. But they argue that this distrust has become so pervasive that it's actually paralyzing us. It's preventing us from functioning effectively as a society. They highlight the impact of political polarization, the influence of special interests, and this rise of, the partisan media in fueling this decline in trust. It's like we're constantly being bombarded with information that just confirms our existing biases.
Right.
And it makes it so much harder to even see the other side's perspective or to find common ground.
It's like we're living in these completely different realities, each with its own set of facts. No wonder it's so hard to have a civil conversation these days, let alone agree on solutions to these complex problems.
Absolutely. They argue that restoring trust and a shared sense of purpose are essential for, good governance and actually being able to solve problems together. If we don't trust our institutions, we're not going to support the collective action that's needed to address these big challenges.
Okay, so we need to rebuild trust. But how do we do that in such a divided and polarized society? It seems like an impossible task.
Yeah. They acknowledge it won't be easy,
Yeah.
but they do offer some suggestions. They argue that it starts with transparency,
Okay.
accountability, and ethical leadership. So we need to rebuild confidence in our institutions, our political system, our financial institutions, our media, and we need to hold those in power accountable and demand transparency. We need to create a culture where ethical behavior is valued and rewarded, not just in business, but in all aspects of our society.
So lead by example.
Exactly. And they also stress the need for a more constructive and less divisive public discourse. We've got to get over that can't we all just get along deficit that they talked about earlier.
Right.
We've got to find ways to bridge these divides and focus on what we have in common.
I agree. But how do we even start that conversation? It feels like we're all just shouting at each other across this giant chasm.
I know. It's a challenge, for sure. But they suggest we need to find ways to engage in civil dialogue, even with those who we disagree with. It's about listening to understand, not just listening to respond. And it's about finding common ground, even if it's just on a small scale.
Okay.
Those little acts of connection can help to rebuild trust and create a more civil and productive public sphere.
Okay, I can get behind that. Finding those points of connection, those shared values that can bring us together. But let's be honest. Some of these problems are so big, so complex, that it's hard to imagine finding solutions that everyone can agree on. How do we get everyone on the same page when it feels like we're speaking different languages?
That's where they get really radical.
Oh.
They start to argue that our current political system is actually part of the problem.
Wait, are they suggesting we overthrow the government? Start a revolution? What are they saying?
Not quite. But they are suggesting some pretty dramatic changes. So in Chapter 19, the Can't We All Just Get Along deficit, they take a really hard look at political polarization and what it's doing to America. They argue that the two major political parties have become so entrenched in their positions that they're basically incapable of offering the kinds of bold solutions that we need.
Okay.
They're stuck in this zero-sum game, right? Where one side's win is automatically the other side's loss.
It's like we're playing tug of war, but nobody is moving.
Exactly. We're just exhausting ourselves. So they suggest that we need to find a way to break free from this stalemate. And they propose this really interesting idea of a third party.
Okay.
Or an independent presidential candidate who could come in and offer this hybrid approach that kind of cuts across those partisan divides.
Well, a third-party candidate, that's a pretty bold idea. But, I mean, is it realistic? Third-party candidates rarely gain much traction in American politics. It seems like such a long shot.
Right, and they acknowledge the challenges,
All right.
but they believe that, this is the moment for something different. They argue that the two major parties have become so out of touch with what everyday Americans are experiencing that there's this real hunger for an alternative.
So it's like the two major parties are stuck in their echo chambers,
Yeah.
just talking to themselves.
Yeah.
and unable to hear the voices of the people outside those narrow ideological bubbles.
Yeah.
And they think that a third-party candidate might be able to break through that noise and offer a fresh perspective.
Exactly. They think a third-party candidate could offer solutions that actually address the real challenges that we're facing, solutions that don't fit neatly into these left or right categories.
Okay, that is a fascinating idea. But can a third-party candidate really make a difference in a system that's designed to keep them out?
Well, they explore that question in Chapter 25, A Third Way to a New Way,
Yeah.
where they look at, throughout history, how third-party movements have actually shaped American politics. And they suggest that even if a third-party candidate doesn't actually win the presidency, they can still be incredibly influential. They can shape the national debate, push the major parties to consider more innovative ideas.
So it's not just about winning, it's about influencing the conversation and pushing for change, right? Offering a new vision for America, one that transcends those old partisan divides.
Exactly. And they believe that this new vision needs to be grounded in a renewed sense of American exceptionalism.
Okay, American exceptionalism, that is a very loaded term. What do they mean by that?
They acknowledge that America has these unique qualities and that historically we've played this, really important role in promoting global stability and prosperity. But they say American exceptionalism isn't something that we're just entitled to. It's something we have to earn
Okay.
each and every generation.
So it's not about clinging to some nostalgic view of the past.
No.
It's about proving our exceptionalism through our actions, through innovation, and through our commitment to making the world a better place.
That's exactly it. They argue that America has a responsibility to lead.
Yeah.
And not just through military might,
Sure.
but through our innovations, our commitment to diplomacy, and those values that have made us this, beacon of hope and opportunity.
Okay, I'm with you. I'm seeing the big picture.
Yeah,
But let's zoom out for a minute.
sure.
If someone picks up this book and
Right.
they read it, what's the one thing that you really want them to take away from it?
I think more than anything, I want them to walk away feeling hopeful. America is facing some really serious challenges right now, but we're not doomed.
Right.
We have everything we need to succeed in this new century. But it's going to require all of us to be willing to change, to adapt, and to work together to create a better future.
It's not about blind faith, though, right?
Right, yeah.
It's about understanding the challenges we face.
Right.
And working to overcome them.
Exactly.
Rolling up our sleeves and getting
Yeah.
it done.
Yeah. And that's really what Friedman and Mandelbaum are calling for in this book. It's a wake-up call, it's a challenge, but ultimately it's a call to action. And I think it's a really inspiring read for anyone who cares about America's future.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to Rambling Dan Rowe's Deep Dive Book Reviews. Please help support our channel by clicking the like and subscribe button. Thank you.
So Friedman and Mandelbaum have taken us on quite a journey here, from China's economic boom to, America's struggles, and then even a little detour through California.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind tour of America's challenges. But remember, they're calling themselves frustrated optimists. They really do believe that America has a second chance, but we need to be willing to make some big changes.
Okay, so what's the prescription? What are their solutions for getting America back on track? Do they offer any concrete solutions, or are they just, waving their hands and saying things need to change?
They do offer concrete solutions, and it starts with what they call a second chance society, which they outline in Chapter 21.
Okay, a second chance society. What does that even mean? Is it like a get out of jail free card for a nation that's made some bad choices?
It's more about creating this culture of resilience, adaptation, and reinvention. A society where failure isn't a dead end, but an opportunity to learn and grow.
Okay, so it's about encouraging risk-taking and innovation, and a willingness to learn from our mistakes. Basically creating a culture where people feel empowered to try new things, to experiment, and to bounce back from those setbacks.
Exactly. They argue that America has always been this land of second chances, a place where people can come to reinvent themselves. But they worry that we're losing that spirit, that we're becoming too risk-averse and complacent.
So how do we revive that second chance spirit? What specific steps do they propose we take?
They offer a range of solutions, from education reforms to economic policies that really encourage innovation and entrepreneurship. And they keep coming back to this idea of investing in education, not just for kids, but for adults as well, creating those opportunities for people to retrain, acquire new skills throughout their lives.
Lifelong learning. The idea that you're never too old to learn something new. But what about people who are struggling just to make ends meet? I mean, how can we expect people to focus on learning new skills when they're worried about putting food on the table or, keeping a roof over their heads?
That's a really important point, and they acknowledge that economic security is really a prerequisite for the second chance society to work. They argue that we need to create an economy that works for everyone, not just the wealthy few. So they talk about policies that promote job creation, raise wages, and provide a safety net for those who are struggling.
Okay, so it's a holistic approach. We need to address both the economic and the cultural aspects of this. But can we really pull it off? I mean, it seems like such a huge task.
They believe we can, but it requires a shift in mindset. We need to recognize that we're all in this together. We rise and fall as a nation. And they really emphasize the importance of generational responsibility, which they talk about in chapter 22, a sacred trust.
Okay, a sacred trust, what are they talking about there?
Well, they're talking about the responsibility that we have to leave a better world for future generations. We're not just borrowing this planet from our kids, we're stealing it from them if we don't act responsibly.
Wow, that's a powerful way to put it. It's a reminder that our actions have consequences, not just for us, but for generations to come. But, I mean, what can we actually do to fulfill this sacred trust? What actions can we take?
They really emphasize the importance of investing in three key areas: education, infrastructure, and a sustainable environment. It's about making choices that benefit not just ourselves, but those who come after us.
So thinking long-term instead of just short-term, making sacrifices today to create a better tomorrow for our children and grandchildren.
Exactly. And it requires a shift in values, moving away from instant gratification towards a more sustainable, equitable way of life.
Okay, so we're seeing this theme throughout the book. It's not about just tweaking a few policies here and there. It's about a much deeper transformation. It's a shift in values, priorities, our whole approach to life, really. But how do we make that happen? It seems like such a daunting task to change a whole culture.
Right, and they get very specific in chapter 23. It's not too late to get our groove back, is the title of the chapter.
Okay, I'm ready for their action plan.
Yeah.
What's the roadmap for getting America back on track?
They argue that America can regain its leadership, its global leadership, by doing three key things. First, we have to update our formula for greatness. The second thing is restoring trust in institutions. And then finally, embracing this culture of continuous learning and innovation.
Okay, let's unpack those one by one. So, updating our formula for greatness. What does that even mean? What are the key ingredients there?
They're referring to the factors that have historically driven American success: investing in education, infrastructure, immigration, research and development, and, smart regulations. They argue that we need to kind of double down on what's worked in the past, but also adapt those ingredients to the 21st century.
Got it. So building on our strengths, but also recognizing that we need to evolve and adapt.
Exactly. So they say we need to invest in a world-class education system that prepares students for the jobs of tomorrow, not the jobs of yesterday. Modernize our infrastructure, from transportation to the energy grid to broadband internet. Attract and retain top talent from around the world through a smarter immigration policy. And increase investment in research and development, not just in the private sector, but through these public-private partnerships that can really drive innovation in key areas, like clean energy and biotechnology.
Okay, that's a pretty comprehensive to-do list. But what about restoring trust in institutions? That seems like a much tougher challenge. How do we rebuild trust in a society that's become so cynical?
They say it starts with transparency, accountability, and ethical leadership. We have to rebuild confidence in our political system, our financial institutions, our media, and we need to hold those in power accountable and demand that transparency. Create a culture where ethical behavior is valued, not just in business, but everywhere, and find ways to, engage in civil dialogue, even with those that we may vehemently disagree with. Seek out that common ground and try to build those bridges.
Lead by example.
Yeah.
And create a more civil and constructive public discourse.
Right. But then there's the third piece, which is embracing this culture of continuous learning and innovation. It's not just about acquiring knowledge, it's about using it, adapting it, and always looking for new and better ways of doing things.
So the mindset shift. We need to move from complacency to continuous improvement to being lifelong learners, always striving to be better.
Exactly. And they say this is essential for individuals, for businesses, for the nation. But, and here's where they get really radical, they argue that achieving these changes will require a political shakeup.
Time for some political fireworks. What kind of shakeup are they proposing?
They bring back this idea of A third party or an independent presidential candidate who can offer a hybrid approach, one that kind of rises above the partisan divides. They argue that the two major parties are so stuck in their ideologies that they can't offer the bold solutions that we need. They're too busy fighting each other.
So third-party candidate, they're serious about this. I mean, third parties rarely go anywhere in American politics.
They get that. They acknowledge the challenges, but they think the time is right for something new. They argue that the two major parties are so out of touch with what everyday Americans need and want that there's this real hunger for an alternative, a real opportunity for something new.
So the two parties are in their echo
Yeah.
chambers, unable to hear the voices of those outside of their little ideological bubbles. And I think a third-party candidate could maybe break through that and offer a fresh perspective.
Exactly. And they believe that candidate could appeal to voters across the spectrum, offer solutions that don't fit neatly into that left or right category.
It's fascinating. But is it realistic? Can a third-party candidate actually make a difference in a system that seems stacked against them?
Well, they explore that in Chapter 25, A Third Way to a New Way, and they look back at, history, they examine these different third-party movements and what impact they had, and they argue that even if a third-party candidate doesn't win, they can still have a huge impact on the debate. They can push the major parties to consider new ideas.
So it's not just about winning, it's about changing the conversation, pushing for change, right?
Offering a new vision for America that goes beyond these old partisan battles.
Okay, a new vision.
Yeah.
And they say that vision needs to be grounded in a renewed sense of American exceptionalism.
Yeah. And they're very careful to say that American exceptionalism isn't something that we're entitled to. It's something we have to earn. It's not about looking back with nostalgia. It's about proving our exceptionalism through what we do, our innovations, our commitment to making the world better.
I'm with you. But let's zoom out for a minute. If somebody finishes this book, what's the one thing you hope they really take away from it? What's that core message?
More than anything, I hope people finish this book and feel hopeful. America's facing some tough challenges, but we're not doomed. We have what it takes to thrive in this century, but it's going to require a willingness to change, adapt, and work together to build a better future.
It's not about blind faith. It's about recognizing the challenges and rolling up our sleeves to overcome them.
Exactly. And that's what Friedman and Mandelbaum are really calling for in this book. It's a wake-up call, but it's also a call to action. And a really inspiring read for anyone who cares about the future.
Absolutely. And with that, it's time to wrap up our deep dive into That Used to Be Us, a really thought-provoking and hopeful book. I recommend it to anyone who wants to understand the challenges that we're facing and, most importantly, be a part of building that solution. That's it for this episode, everyone. Catch you next time.